Good morning. Welcome to Sunday School. Answering Donna's question from last week, so I know she's here. Let's turn our Bibles to Revelation, the first chapter, first verse, just as an introduction. We'll read down to verse 3 in a minute, but when you read the very first verse, to the introduction to the revelation of St. John the Divine is the full title. It says, "The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave unto him, to show unto his servants things which must shortly come to pass. And he sent and signified it by his angel unto his servant John." Now, the word signified has been interpreted by some people to mean that everything is symbolic. The word does signify means to indicate something, to point out or to show. I just want to turn to keep your place here, turn to Acts 11:28. We'll see the use of the same word. Acts 11:28. "And there stood up one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit that there should be a great dearth throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar." He identified something, an event that was going to happen. He signified by the Spirit. He pointed it out. He showed what was going to happen. And just back to the book of John, chapter 12, verses 32 and 33. We have Jesus using the same terminology. In John 12, beginning with verse 32, "And I, if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. This he said, signifying what death he should die." So he didn't say, "I'm going to be crucified," but he referred to it. He indicated that possibility, although, of course, it wasn't understood at the time. But back in Revelation chapter 1, it says that this is a revelation of Jesus Christ. Now, the word "of" has a couple different meanings. It can mean it's from someone, or it can mean it's about something. And this is something I've had discussion with before. And it says it's the revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show to his servants. So the question is this a revelation about Jesus? Which I've heard people say that, basically the whole Bible is all about Jesus. You can find Jesus everywhere. Or is it simply a revelation from Jesus? And that's the way I think it makes sense. Because this revelation comes from Jesus. God gave it to him to show us. That's basically what the verse is saying. And it's very clear that it says to show us things which must shortly come to pass. And let's just read the next two verses. That verse ends with, "He signified it by his angel unto his servant John, who bear record," in verse 2, "bear record of the word of God, and of the testimony of Jesus Christ, and of all things that he saw. Blessed is he that readeth, and they that hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written therein, for the time is at hand." There is a lot of symbolism in the book, but that doesn't mean everything is symbolic. Some things are very clear that we don't have to interpret them. The things that are symbolic, sometimes they can be confusing. Donna's not here, is she? Okay. So, the point is, some things are symbolic. We may not have a full understanding. That doesn't mean we're not supposed to read the book or we should avoid it. Verse 3 says, "We are blessed when we read and when we hear the words of this prophecy." So, just because it's hard to interpret it or hard to understand completely doesn't mean we should avoid it. I don't think we completely understand John 3:16, or I can say I don't. We don't have a complete understanding of God's revelation or His Word throughout. There's always something to learn. But we are encouraged to read this book, to study it, to meditate on it, to enjoy it, to explore it. So we're going to go to chapter 12, because last week we were talking about the symbolism of the beast that appears in chapter 13 and is further described in chapter 17. And we applied the symbolism and the corresponding interpretations that Daniel gave in his book of prophecy, specifically chapter 7, 8, 9, and 11 of Daniel, speaks about the same symbolic beast and characteristics. The beast in Revelation pertains to a future dictator, a future world power that will persecute the Jewish people more completely than have ever been persecuted. And isn't it catching your attention how badly Jewish people are hated around the world? I mean, it's shocking to think that there's this much hatred in our country. And I know some of it is imported, but a lot of it's not. Jews have always been under attack, and of course that's satanic in origin. We don't have to defend that idea. But in chapter 12, let's read down verses 1 through 6 this is a parenthetical statement. Well, let's just read it. I won't say any more. I'll just get myself in trouble here. And it says, "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing in birth, and pained to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days." Now, when you see in Scripture about a woman bearing a child that the dragon wants to devour, where do we, or at least a lot of people, seem to go first? To Jesus, the birth of Jesus. The mother, his mother Mary, giving birth, and of course, Satan did try to kill that child. He had Herod attack the area and kill every child. Was it every child or every man-child? Under the age of 2, up to the age of 2. But there's some things here that don't fit. Yes, the dragon wants to devour this child, but it says in verse 6 that the woman fled into the wilderness. Mary and Joseph went to Egypt. They went there for a while, but they came back. But it says that they should be fed there for 1,260 days, which, by calculating a year at 360 days, which is the biblical pattern for a year, 360 days. This is 3.5 years. So it relates to the half of the 7-year tribulation period, that the woman will be protected. And let's look at some other things. This is everything I've learned from being taught here in this church. So it's not my doing. We're going to go back to verse 1. It says, there appeared a great wonder in heaven. That indicates this is This is symbolic to John. He says, what I saw was a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. Now, can we relate that to any scripture in the Old Testament? Try Genesis 37. We're going to begin with verse 5 and read to verse 11. If I can find Genesis 37. In Genesis 37, beginning with verse 5, we have the story of Joseph. And I know it's there. I'm going to find it. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it to his brethren, and they hated him yet the more. He said unto them, Hear, I pray you, this dream which I've dreamed. For behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf arose and stood upright. Behold, your sheaves stood around about it and made obeisance, or bowed to my sheaf. And his brethren said to him, Shalt thou indeed rule over us? Shalt thou indeed have dominion over us? They hated him yet the more for his dreams and for his words. Verse 9 says, And he dreamed yet another dream, and told it to his brethren, and said, Behold, I have dreamed a dream more. He didn't learn. Should be mouthing off. He's 17. What does he know? I dreamed a dream more. Behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. And he told it to his father and to his brethren. His father rebuked him and said unto him, What is this dream which thou hast dreamed? Shalt I and thy mother and thy brethren indeed come to bow down ourselves to thee and to the earth? And his brethren envied him, but his father observed the saying. His dream, he saw the sun and the moon and the 11 stars. The 11 stars were his brothers. The sun and the moon indicated his parents. So it's sort of connected to 12:1, where there was a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. The 12 stars is symbolic of the nation of Israel. And so we take this to be a picture of the family of Israel, of the nation of Israel. We're in Revelation 12:1. Donna, I'm glad you're back up here. Verse 2 says that she, being with child, she cried, travailing in birth, pain to be delivered. And verse 3, there was another wonder that appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads, 10 horns, and 7 crowns. Do you remember how those numbers and those symbols are found in the next chapter? In chapter 13, the beast has 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns. The symbolism of the Antichrist kingdom. The Antichrist. In chapter 12, this is the onset of the tribulation beginning for the Jewish people. It'll happen in the middle of the week. We know we read in Daniel chapter 9, if I remember correctly, that the Antichrist will make a peace treaty with Israel that will be set for 7 years. He will fight against territories surrounding Israel, the enemies, the Arab kingdoms really, the Muslim kingdoms, and he will conquer them. But in the middle of the week, in the middle of the 7 years, he will turn on Israel. And that's what we see being set up here. The dragon, it says in verse 4, at the end of verse 4, it says he stood ready. He stood before the woman who was ready to be delivered, and he wanted to devour her child as soon as it was born. In verse 5 and 6, let's read those. She brought forth a man-child who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron. and her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had a place prepared of God, that they should feed her 1,260 days. Now, what is, I think in verse 5, the indication that this child represents Jesus is because he's going to rule the nations with a rod of iron. And I failed to look up the verses that refer to the believers of Christ ruling with Christ, having that same authority of ruling over the nations with a rod of iron. I didn't look that up. I failed to. But I want to speak about this man-child that the woman brought forth. And I want to go back to chapter 7 in Revelation. In chapter 7, verses 1 through 4, this was after the seals began to be opened on the book that was to be revealed. And there were 7 seals, and the 6th seal was opened. The 5th and 6th seal were opened in the previous chapter. And in chapter 7, it says, "And after these things I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding the 4 winds of the earth, that the wind should not blow on the earth, nor on the sea, nor on any tree. And I saw another angel ascending from the east, having the seal of the living God. He cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels, to whom it was given to hurt the earth and the sea, saying, Hurt not the earth, neither the sea, nor the trees, till we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. And I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel." The chapter goes on to speak that there were 12,000 from this tribe, 12,000 from that tribe. 12 tribes are mentioned. 12 times 12,000 is 144,000. So there are individuals that are sealed for protection because of their faithfulness to Christ. And in chapter 14, we don't see these again. We see them again in chapter 14 is what I meant to say. In chapter 14, if we go there to the first 5 verses, John says, "I looked, and lo, a lamb stood on the Mount of Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads." They were sealed for protection. "I heard a voice from heaven as the voice of many waters, and as the voice of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps." Of course they harp with their harps. "And they sung as it were a new song before the throne and before the 4 beasts and the elders. And no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were redeemed from the earth." That indicates they had a unique experience. The song they sang was a song of redemption, but it was unique to them. Verse 4, "These are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the firstfruits unto God and to the Lamb. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God." That language in verse 4, that they were not defiled, I just want to remind you that in Scripture, especially throughout the Old Testament, when Israel fell into idolatry, when they went after other gods, God called it a spiritual adultery. That, in a sense, the nation is, you're basically you're my wife. You're married to me, and you're going after others. It's not a. It's a spiritual. It's a symbolism. It's one of those things that. It doesn't mean that they were all men or that they were all women. Somebody said if They weren't defiled with women, and they were virgins, and virgins, what you usually refer to as females that aren't married. But it's the symbolism here of spiritual faithfulness to God. And they are raptured out of the earth. They are taken. In verse 7, what we read about them is they were sealed before the real violence and the persecution began at the middle of the week of the tribulation. They were raptured out. They're here on the earth. They're sealed by God. The next thing you know, they're in heaven. They're on Mount Zion in heaven. And the Lamb is with them. They're singing a song of rejoicing and a song of salvation, a song of victory, because they were redeemed from the earth. This is what is symbolically shown as the man-child that is caught up to heaven in chapter 12, verse 5. I love it. Medical people give you their appointments on Sunday. Why is that? Chapter 12 in verse 5 of Revelation. And she brought forth a man-child who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God into his throne. That's the 144,000 redeemed out of Israel. And we know all Israel will be saved if they live through the time of tribulation, because God will appear to them. But in Isaiah 66, keep your finger here in chapter 12, but go with me to the last chapter of Isaiah, chapter 66, verses 7 and 8. Isaiah 66, verse 7 and 8. And this is Isaiah speaking. He speaks of the nation. He says, before she travailed, she brought forth. Before her pain came, she was delivered of a man-child. Who hath heard such a thing? Who has seen such things? Shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day, or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth her children. When you put Isaiah 66 with the prophecy of the woman who brings forth a man-child that is caught up to the throne, you have, before her travail, before her birth pangs were complete, she was delivered of a man-child who was caught up. In Revelation, that man-child is caught up to the throne, protected from the persecutions of the Antichrist, protected from the judgment that was going to hit the earth, that is going to be destructive against all unbelievers. But then it says that shall the earth be made to bring forth in one day, or shall a nation be born at once? For as soon as Zion travailed, she brought forth children, her children. Shall a nation be born at once? What happens in Revelation is there will be 144,000 Israelites who will be sealed by God and redeemed, raptured out of the earth. And then Israel, what happens? Are we in chapter 12? Go back to chapter 12 again. In verse 6, it says, the woman fled into the wilderness where she has a place prepared of God, and they shall feed her there 1,260 days, the next 3.5 years. The next several verses speak about war in heaven, Satan and his angels being cast out and cast to the earth with great wrath. But go down to verse 13 in Revelation 12. It says, and when the dragon saw that he was cast unto the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place where she was nourished for a time and times and half a time. That's a year. Times is plural, 2 more years, and half a time. So 3.5 years. It's another way of stating the 1260 days. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, that he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. This, I believe, is to be symbolic of the amount of attack against the Jewish people. A flood of people, a flood of armies, a flood of attacks of all types. Verse 16, and the earth helped the woman. The earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which shall keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is where Jesus says there will be great tribulation, greater than has ever been seen, ever will be seen. The next chapter, the very next verse, chapter 13:1, is when the beast arises. So this is an occurrence that takes place in the middle of the week of tribulation. Satan wants to attack Israel. He sees that there are people of Israel. You know how many times, I just remember there are places in the Old Testament that says, in the latter times you will consider this. In the latter times, in the latter days you will read, you'll think of this, you will understand this. There will be probably the revival that people are looking for is probably what will happen in the Jewish nation when they see some of these things come to pass. There will be those who turn to God, and just like the church, they will be protected from this time of great tribulation by this 144,000 that are carried out of the earth. Satan will still take out his hatred and his wrath against the Israelites, against all Jewish people, and they will have to flee. Remember, Jesus said, when you see the abomination that makes desolate standing in the temple, then flee. Don't if you're on the roof, don't go in the house to get some clothes. Go as fast, just flee to the mountains, get to the wilderness. There'll be places where they will be protected. So the symbolism there, it's complex. It's hard for me to even, I think, declare it sometimes in a definitive way. But we have to be careful when we have symbolism that we don't make up an answer. We have to find what the scriptures say, what else backs up or supports what God is saying here. It's time to end. Is that follow? Some of you have heard it before, but hopefully that makes sense. Anybody have a question they want to, something that just doesn't make sense? Doesn't mean I know the answer, but there are answers to a lot of this. That's why we have to read stuff more than once to get a feeling for it. Nothing? All right, thank you.